Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm with the 2022, I think it's a 22, Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. And so I wanted to bring you a quick walk around. I'm in the mountains of Tennessee, not far from the tail of the dragon. And I'm out here with the Southeast Regional Media Association, otherwise known as Sarama, which sounds kind of like a day spa, but whatever. I'm here with the 4xe and a number of other vehicles, some of which are going to go on the dragon, some of which, like this 4xe, are not, and I'm kind of giving you a preview of as many vehicles as I can during my time out here. So let's take a look at this Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe and see why or why not should you consider the 4xe for your next mid to largish SUV. Now, front end styling is pretty great. In fact, the whole car styling is pretty great because it's a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and the Jeep Grand Cherokee in its current iteration looks pretty darn good in my opinion. So I think that is a big positive. If you're driving a Jeep Grand Cherokee, people know that you're driving a Jeep, and a lot of people like that. Also, because this is a more kind of traditional boxy SUV design, you've got all the kind of tough cues that come along with it, as well as a pretty good amount of cargo space, which we'll look at in a second. I also personally do like the blue accents that Jeep is doing with the 4xe models to show that they are electrified. I think the blue tow hooks on this model look particularly cool. I like the blue accents. I just think it's a nice way to kind of differentiate these tough and off-road ready vehicles from their gas-only counterparts. It's Jeep acknowledging that the hybrid thing might be a thing. And since I mentioned cargo space, let's take a look at the cargo space. It's pretty generous here, and I'll put the cubic feet. In fact, I'll put most of the stats on the screen since I'm having to film this on the fly and I don't have an info sheet on me. So I'll put the stats on the screen so you guys can see, but it's definitely more than competitive in the class. You got a power operating liftgate. This is the Overland trim. This thing is like fully loaded 4xe, and we're going to get to that in a second as well because it comes with a fully loaded price tag. But I think you'll be more than happy if you are not needing an incredible amount of space. And you know me, I'm not a big fan. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Here's a little tidbit about me. I'm not a big fan of unnecessary third rows. I actually really like two-row SUVs with some size to them. And so I think the 4xe delivers in this regard. You can have a family of four like I do, and you could pack this thing to the gills and easily take a vacation. Ditto the rear seat space, honestly. I think the rear seat here is generous enough. I'm 6.5 feet tall, and here's kind of an example of how I fit behind myself. Take that with a grain of salt because I am a giant, but the front seat is basically where I would have it.
Sitting behind myself is a little bit tight for a giant, but you'll probably have better luck.
So you can see it's not bad. I mean, this is a two-row kind of large midsize SUV, but what makes the 4xe special has more to do with its powertrain. Now, the real party piece here is Jeep's engine. So this is a turbocharged four-cylinder paired with an electric motor. It's making 375 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque, which is healthy, and it's running through an 8-speed automatic transmission. But because this is a 4xe, it gives you 25 miles of fully electric range. And one of the things I do enjoy about this vehicle is that you can kind of choose how to deploy that, which is pretty special. So you can use that 25 miles of range right away if you're doing kind of suburban commuting, or you can save it and you can use that 25 miles of range on the trail. So I do like that. Now, a couple downsides. I will admit that I think when the changeover happens from fully electric or hybrid mode to using the gas-powered engine, it's a little rough, it's a little coarse, it's not the smoothest engine in the world. Also, we're out here kind of doing laps and stuff, so I can't really speak to real-world fuel economy. I'll put the sort of estimated fuel economy on the screen, but I don't think real-world fuel economy is possible on this style of press drive. So there's that. It does feel powerful. 470 pound-feet of torque is a healthy amount of torque, but it doesn't feel like massive. It's not like crazy powerful. So there's that. 8-speed automatic though is pretty invisible. It seems to shift well. And overall the ride and handling isn't bad. So let's talk about that for a second. So one of the great things about being on these press drives is that we get a lot of seat time in a lot of different vehicles. And so we kind of compare them better back to back. So what do I think from behind the wheel of the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe? Well, it's pretty good. I mean, this thing is on air suspension, I believe, which allows it to raise and lower. And I think it has like almost 11 inches of ground clearance in its highest setting. So definitely very Jeep-like, exactly what you would expect from a Jeep. Now, does that air suspension necessarily pay off in terms of ride quality or comfort? No, it doesn't really. This thing rides okay for what it is, but in terms of a midsize SUV, it does move around a decent amount. It's not helped by the fact that the ride is a little harsher than what you'd expect because this thing is on some serious off-road tires. So it's equipped to do things that a lot of normal people aren't probably going to do, at least not do as often as they think. So that does have a little bit of a negative impact. Also, for something that has 470 pound-feet of torque, this thing doesn't necessarily feel like it has 470 pound-feet of torque. If you mash the throttle to the floor, which I'm not going to do currently because we're on a twisty mountain road, but if you mash the throttle to the floor, there's a big delay, and then it takes a second for that turbo to kind of spool up and start motivating the vehicle. So there's a noticeable kind of lag there, which is a little surprising for something that has that electric assist. You know, this has a hybrid powertrain. So it's not super quick, and you're not gonna use that wave of torque to enjoy a twisty mountain road like this. I think it might pay dividends off-road, but I don't think it's something that's gonna blow your hair back, at least not as much as the numbers would suggest on paper. Now, the 8-speed automatic performs its duties pretty well. There was a delay there, but I don't think that's the automatic's fault as much as it is the powertrain just kind of spooling up. Also, you could probably tell for someone 6.5 feet tall, the driving position is pretty great. I got loads of room. The steering wheel's nice and big and chunky, and it comes out far. The seats are a little firm, but we don't get a ton of seat time in these, so sometimes a firm seat is good for my messed up back, so I'm not gonna judge this thing because I certainly haven't had any issues in the time that I've been in it, so I won't ding it for that. They're just firmer than you might expect. I mean, I just got out of one of the Infinities, and that has one of those, you know, space cushions that Nissan and Infiniti do, so this is not that, but it is definitely not uncomfortable. I also think for a touchscreen and stuff, it responds relatively quickly. Like all the technology that I mentioned in the review works pretty well. I like the gauge cluster a lot, actually. The gauge cluster looks very nice, and that passenger screen looks very nice. So there are some premium touches, but if you are gonna sit down and be honest with yourself and you're gonna be like, I'm not gonna do a lot of the things that this thing is capable of doing, and look in the mirror, right? Just do it right now. Just go to a mirror and look in the mirror and be honest with yourself and say, what do I actually need this family SUV for? And unless massive, unstoppable off-road capability comes up in your discussion, then there are others that do it better for the price. And that would certainly drive better for the price on road, especially like this, well-paved mountain roads. And you might be like, that's not what the Grand Cherokee is supposed to do. Is it though? Is it not? Because there's a lot of families up here.
Now, here's where my main criticism begins. In the interior of the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. So here's the thing. The Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe, as you see it here, an Overland trim with Quadra-Track 2 all-wheel drive. I mean, this thing has the air suspension. This thing has quite literally every single possible thing that Jeep can throw at it. This is like a $75,000 SUV, and it has some features that are features you'd expect to find on a $75,000 SUV. Like it has these dual screens that I'll show you in B-roll cutaway that are really nice. The screens look good. The gauge cluster looks good. The passenger screen over here is super cool, and that looks good. But then it also has some kind of cost-saving measures, like the sort of fake wood trim feels like the plastic it is. Some of the panel gaps are kind of atrocious. surface, like the sort of things that you expect to, maybe find in a Jeep vehicle. And that's a bit unfortunate because there is a lot to like. The overall design is nice, but there's too much piano black. It has a crazy Macintosh stereo, but are you really going to upgrade to something like that when you have a, loose panel? Like, the seats feel good, but they're kind of hard. The leather feels fine. Like, there's just sort of a hit and miss. That's the best way to describe it, is kind of hit and miss. And so I would encourage you to kind of go sit in one, feel one, move around in it, test it, touch it, to decide if you want to drop your 75 grand on something that you're not going to take off-road as much as you think you are. So should you buy a Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe, especially in this Overland trim with all of the off-road goodies? Well, that's a tough call. I'm not so sure that you should at this price. I mean, this thing is in the mid-70s, and that is a lot of money for something that gives you a lot of features. It definitely has bells and whistles, and it definitely has the ability to go just about anywhere. But a lot of people are looking for a substantial amount of luxury and features, and the Jeep does deliver on some of them, but it misses the mark in some of those key detail areas. I just had the Acura MDX Type S recently, and I felt like at 72 grand, that was a bit dear for that vehicle, and that vehicle just had a little bit higher level of build quality and sophistication, especially in the ride and handling. Now, you might say that's a sporty intention SUV, and you would be right, and this thing is for hardcore off-roaders, but how many of these things do you see parked in the Kroger parking lot? Honestly, be serious, okay? If you are that 1% of people that's actually gonna hardcore off-road it, then sure, but for most people, the answer is no, they're not. And I kind of think that sort of sums up the 4xe in general. It is a fairly luxurious, fairly well-equipped, and very capable semi-luxury off-road vehicle, but you're playing in BMW X5 territory and Mercedes GLE territory, and you're competing with Audi, and you also have mainstream brands offering you a lot of the same content for way, way, way less money. So how much can you trade on that off-road ability to justify the price? For me, the answer is not enough, but I would encourage you to check one out if you are a more outdoorsy person, to see that if you would be willing to live with some of the negatives, okay? So that's kind of my final thoughts on the Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. I hope you like this quick preview of the 2023 Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. As always, drive safe. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, peace.